So, where were we?
We've been to Gibraltar.
Yeah, Gibraltar. We're getting ready to go over to Tangiers.
Right. We spent an afternoon in Tangiers, saw the Kasbah. We had a guide.
Which, yeah, getting the guide was pretty funny because we never, paid for somebody to guide us around. And you get off the boat there at that harbor and, just descended upon by all these guys that want to give you a tour of the Kasbah, and nope. And this one guy just wouldn't give up. He kept following us and kept lowering his price until finally we decided, well, $5 or whatever, okay. And it was such a good thing that we did, because for one thing, we only had a few hours before we were going to get back on that boat, and the Kasbah would have way intimidated us. We would not have gone wandering around in there without that man. Do you want to?
Yeah, people were not friendly, and especially young men would kind of come right up at us, with very angry expressions. And of course, we had no idea what was going on. But it was the first time we had encountered that kind of behavior, and it was a little bit frightening.
There were all, it just seemed like there were a lot of young men standing in doorways in these, I don't know, burnous with, kind of looking out of these hooded garments and watching us. And so it was very comforting to be with this Arab guy leading us around. Plus he would just zip, down these little alleyways we never would have gone down, and in the back of shops. And part of his thing was to get us places that he hoped we'd buy something. I think I finally bought a leather book cover, which I think I held on to until kind of recently. But anyway. One
thing that was very interesting to me was you would see these people carrying a flat board with loaves on it. And the deal there was that you'd make the bread in your own home, but you would take it somewhere else to be baked. There were community bakers. So that was, something from the old ways, I guess. So anyway, then we drove across the Costa del Sol, and then into France.
We've missed out a little bit about those guys from the pension paying us and riding with us. We've missed that whole loop of riding from Spain down into Italy and Greece.
No, we picked those guys up in Venice.
We did? I thought it was the pension guys. They didn't ride with us?
No.
Okay, excuse me.
Yeah, remember one of the guys was a Southerner, and he had been there to brush up his French. He was of French ancestry. They were both Southerners, because I remember they were racists, and that came up a couple of times. But no, we met those guys in the Venice hospital.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Okay.
Because we went, we stayed in Nice. I remember the hostel was on the Moyen Corniche, and there was nobody around, and it was cold, so we didn't swim in the Mediterranean or anything.
Went up into the hills to a couple of small towns.
Yeah, you remember the Foundation Mall?
Yeah.
That had just opened.
Yeah, had Giacometti sculptures, and I'd read about that in a Time magazine or something. Yeah, it was brand new.
Yeah, beautiful place. We went to, was it San Remo, where there was the Cocteau Chapel, and there was a Matisse Chapel we went to?
I don't remember the Cocteau Chapel.
Yeah, and we went to Grasse, which is the center of the perfume industry. Beautiful little hill town. And then we crossed over into Italy, and the first place I remember in Italy is Pisa. We were kind of hot-footing it at that point to get to Rome, but we spent an afternoon in Pisa and saw the Leaning Tower, and there's the fantastic Romanesque church right next to it.
At that time you could walk up and go walk around the tower.
Yeah,
they don't allow that anymore.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
I don't know if you could climb it, I don't think so, but, because it was leaning.
I know, but it seems like we went up in there.
Really? I don't remember that, but it's possible. Yeah, things were much, more open. And then we got to Rome, and we were in Rome for 10 days. And I do think if there was only one place that you could go in Europe, Rome would be a good choice, because there's the ancient world, the Forum, and the Pantheon, and then there's all the Renaissance stuff, and then the modern stuff from the fascist era. There was a lot of architecture, a lot of buildings built during that time. Anyway, it's kind of the most complete sort of tourist city, as far as, not to mention Vatican City. So we didn't go farther than that in Europe, in Italy.
But, one thing as far as traveling at the time that we were, and in the winter, we were in the Sistine Chapel with 2 or 3 people in there. It was,
Yeah.
we could stand in there and gaze at the ceiling all day if we wanted to, without being in a crowd, and going up in the cathedral where there's the apostles are all around the
Yeah, that's
statues
right.
around the
Yeah,
top.
that balcony. Yeah.
Yeah, I bet they don't even let people up there anymore.
Yeah.
I don't know, but
So then, we went then from Rome. When I said we didn't go further in Italy, I meant further south. We went then to Florence. Had a few days there, and then we went to Venice. And there was nobody in Venice. It was rainy, and the place was deserted. But the Piazza San Marco is, magnificent, and there was nobody there. We had it all to ourselves. Then we drove to Trieste, and by this time we had these 2 passengers in the back of who were on. They were going to Greece as well.
So just picture this. We've picked up these 2 American guys. They're sitting in the back seat of a Volkswagen with 3 drawers from our trunk between them.
Yeah.
Plus,
Their own luggage on their lap.
I had given Jen a guitar for Christmas.
One of them had to hold the guitar for 1,200 miles. So the trip across Yugoslavia.
That's very memorable.
Yeah, it was the road was, there was hardly any traffic at all on this main long highway that goes the full length of Yugoslavia, and it was packed with snow. So I could drive about 45 miles an hour, and any faster than that, and it just didn't feel secure. And I remember one time we saw off the road a little village. And we decided to go over there and see if we could buy some bread or something. And we pulled into this village, and I tell you, it was like 19th century. There were, horse-drawn carts. The bread was in bin. It wasn't wrapped or anything. They didn't put it in a paper bag. It was just these huge loaves of this very heavy dark bread in this bin, and it cost next to nothing. And we would see, and driving along that road, we saw sleighs going along down next to the road.
Yeah, waving at us.
Waving at us, horse-drawn sleighs. So then we got to Athens, said goodbye to our passengers, and I think we were a week in Athens, in that area.
A while, yeah.
And during that time, we went to Sounion, which is a beautiful Poseidon temple out on a point. And we went to Delphi, which was up in the mountains, and that was very interesting to see these little mountain villages, and just how, primitive things were there. And Athens, of course, is a great city. The Parthenon and the National Museum has these wonderful artifacts from 5th century BC Greek times.
One of the things that, I don't know where you're going, but one of the things that is memorable about Athens is we would go every day to the American Express. Jan remembers even actually more vividly than I do that every time in an American Express, about 90% of the time I didn't have any letters from Ed, so I would cry. But was it at American in Athens, where every day we'd say we're not going to go back to that shop and buy more baklava.
Yeah, yeah.
And
We discovered baklava.
every day, we had
And
to
there-
go back and have baklava again.
There were these little pastry shops, and they would have a little cafe table inside the door, and you could have for most people they took it home, but you could have your baklava there, and a cup of coffee, and the baklava was wonderful, and neither of us had ever heard of it, so that was quite a revelation. As a matter of fact, I think that pastries in all the countries we visited were a revelation. Quite different, French pastries are different than Spanish, or different than German, and all much better than what you could find in Portland, Oregon at that time.
Maybe still.
Yeah, yeah.
Anyway, yeah, we learned a lot. I mean, we don't talk about food much, but we ate an awful lot of picnic kind of meals. Where we'd go into a grocery store and we discovered Braunschweiger. We'd never had yogurt. We'd never
That's
had
right.
yogurt.
Never heard of yogurt.
And we're living on this wonderful European yogurt and these wonderful, heavy breads and fabulous cheeses. And, 90% of our meals were like that.
Yeah. Our lunches, we'd buy lunches in whatever grocery store we could find. And Lynn would open the glove box on the Volkswagen, and that was the table where she made lunch.
Oh, that's cute, sweet. I don't remember that.
And I think that we always tried to eat in one restaurant in every country, so get some idea. I remember pepper steak in Marseille and spaghetti. But
Yeah, never had spaghetti carbonara. That was an absolute first.
That's right. Yeah, there was a place in Rome where all the travelers went. They had, I don't know, for 50 cents or something, you could get a plate of spaghetti.
One of the things you couldn't get was pizza.
That's right. And they hadn't heard of pizza.
Well, they heard of it. They'd heard of it. They had, awnings that said pizza, but oh no, that's just in the summer for the tourists.
I see. Yeah.
I don't think we ever.
No, we never had pizza. So anyway, moving right along, then we drove back the full length of Yugoslavia, and for some reason we didn't go back. We didn't go back to Trieste. We continued straight north, and went into Hungary.
But what about that drunken dinner in Yugoslavia? That was when the guys were still with us.
Yeah, that was on the way down.
Yeah.
We were staying in the youth hostel, deep snow everywhere, and we went to a restaurant, and it was a real Yugoslavian place. I mean, we were the only foreigners there, and they had live music, and they served this white wine, and they would put a bottle of seltzer on the table. So we'd add seltzer to the white wine. Well, yeah. So
Goes down real easy.
Next thing I know, we're really drunk. And I remember staggering back and forth to the bathroom, sort of putting my hand on people's shoulders as I went, and them looking discouragingly at me. And then when we got done, we piled back into the Volkswagen. I can't imagine how I drove the thing. But anyway, we got back to the hostel, and it had been snowing. It had been snowing a lot. So I just pulled off the road and drove in next to the hostel. And when we got up the next morning, the car was completely buried in snow. And I remember that night, there were bunk beds, and I was in the lower bunk, and one of the guys we were traveling with was in the upper bed, and he rolled out of bed, fell clear to the floor. Didn't hurt himself, but.
Well, and I was, there was 3 guys, and then I was by myself in the women's dorm, and I got sick in the night. I threw up all night. Oh God, it was horrible, horrible.
So watch out for the white wine with seltzer.
I also dropped my passport in there, and somebody came running out to the car.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Is that right?
with, lady, you dropped your passport.
Yeah. So
Is
anyway.
that where did we stay in that hotel? That was the guys who were with us when they gave us one price at night and a different price in the morning, and
Yeah.
I pitched a gigantic fit.
Yeah, I think that was in Belgrade.
That was later, but those
I
guys
think-
were with us.
Were they? Anyway, we were told that they had a student rate at a particular hotel. So we went there and inquired, and the guy said, fine, yeah, here's your rate, and it was affordable. Well, we get up the next morning ready to check out, and it was somebody else at the desk, and they would not honor that rate. And Lynn had a kind of a standoff with them, and it was an argument that eventually I think that they gave in because they wanted to get rid of her, but she was not going to pay.
Creating quite a scene.
Because suddenly it was like 5 times of what we'd been quoted or something. So anyway, we won that battle. And so then Hungary was completely different than anywhere else we'd ever been. We had a 2-day visa. We went to Budapest. And it was,
And you had to account for how much money you had going in, and they were going to count it when you left. They wanted to know what you spent there.
yeah,
Black market was a big thing.
yeah. And they had soft currency, so you didn't want to change more money than you were going to need because the money was no good outside the country. Yeah, I remember in Budapest we were in some kind of a restaurant or a bar or something, and this there were a couple of young couples there, and the man came up, and Lynn was wearing net stockings. He wanted to buy her stockings.
Don't remember.
They would
that.
buy anything you had.
I don't remember.
But of course they'd pay with zlotys, which weren't any good to us. And you really had the feeling of a very oppressive government. We were driving along the street in Budapest in the evening. There was no traffic, and I was just driving with my park lights on, and which was common in a lot of places in Europe. Well, this little sedan pulls in front of me and cuts me off. So we stopped. 4 men wearing leather jackets get out, and 2 of them had machine guns, and they wanted to see our papers. And it was really scary.
I don't remember that.
It was really, and then we were in a restaurant in Budapest, and this man approached us, and his story was he wanted to know if we were going to Vienna. And we said, yeah, we were going to Vienna. He said, when you get to Vienna, will you send me a letter inviting me to come and stay with you in Vienna? And with that, I can get a visa to leave the country. So he had a briefcase. He opens up the briefcase and he starts to write down his information. And then he sees there's a man on the street looking in the plate glass window. And the man was a classic, trench coat, fedora pulled down over his eyes. And the guy packed up everything and ran out through the kitchen. And that was the last we saw of him.
I don't remember that.
That was, it was a really, there was that real feeling of oppression there. Beautiful churches and kind of Asian looking, spiral columns, and decorations were very much different than Western Europe.
That's where we slept in the car one night.
Oh, did we?
It was a snowy night. God, it was so cold. I don't think we could find the youth hostel, or it got too late or something anyway. Ended up sleeping in the car, both of us.
So then from there we drove to Vienna. Yeah, we went to Vienna, which is a magnificent city. And let's see, was it there we were in the underground?
Mm-hmm.
We stayed in a youth hostel that had been a bomb shelter during the Second World War. And it was very unusual in that you had a private room. Well, it wasn't private bathroom. So we got there, and I was tired. I went to sleep. I'm a very heavy sleeper. Well, in the night, after I'd gone to sleep, Lynn was taking a shower. She looks up, and there's a man peering over the top of the shower stall at her. And apparently she screamed and put something on and ran to my room, banged on the door, couldn't wake me. But I think some other people kind of came to your aid, didn't they?
Yeah, I think, I don't remember exactly. I know I had to go back and, I did have a private room, but I was so shook up. It really scared me.
Yeah.
But, you're just a peeping Tom, but.
Yeah. So then we went to Innsbruck. And there was a big drama in Innsbruck because we were expecting money from home in Innsbruck. And went to American Express, no letter for us from mom and dad with the next month's money. So we thought, well, they know that the next stop on our trip is Munich. So that's probably where the money is. So we went to Munich, no money.
Gosh, I don't remember this.
So we went back to Innsbruck and asked them at the American Express to do another search. Well, rather than filing our letters under M, they'd filed it under N. And so they looked around, and they found that it had been there all along. So,
Wow.
yeah.
That's why we're doing this, because I don't remember that.
Yeah, and then we went back to Munich and spent some time there and went to the Hofbrau house where Hitler met with his cronies and drank a whole lot of beer, and wonderful beer that they served in these big stoneware 1-liter mugs.
I definitely learned to like beer in Germany.
Yeah, yeah, it was lovely beer.
It was warm. They didn't serve it cold.
Yeah, they didn't refrigerate it. Yeah. So then what? We went to. Then I guess we went north and got rid of the car, didn't we?
Maybe.
Yeah. So we went to Hamburg and we arranged to ship the car from Hamburg to New Jersey. And then we hitchhiked. We hitchhiked to Copenhagen and back, and then we hitchhiked across Belgium.
Well, you can't just go over that hitchhiking.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, remember we had these drawers in the back of the car, and we did get rid of the drawers, but we didn't get rid of very much of the stuff.
Oh yeah.
And we had, we were way overburdened with suitcases and bags and odd bags. I mean, no backpack, no way.
Yeah, no backpack.
Never heard of it. I mean, it wasn't that we wouldn't have gotten one.
We didn't know about
We didn't know about
Yeah.
them, to be honest. So people didn't want to pick us up because we've got all this shit. And cars, I mean, I have such a strong memory of these beautiful cars, big sedans with one person. Nobody like that ever picked us up. Who picked us up? A farmer, with a little putt, what I want to say, pickup. I mean, one guy that I particularly remember, and these guys, the people that did pick us up, they were always so warm and cheerful, and offering us cigarettes, which cost a lot, and we were both smoking at that time. Anyway, this one guy, he had his pickup, and there was a tarp over the bed of it, and he threw our baggage up on top of that, and we're riding along, and there's a lot of noise back there, and he stopped. I don't know, he asked or whatever. He's got like a bunch of hogs in there. But every time somebody picked us up, it was kind of a version of that,
Yeah.
And never the wealthy people in their new BMWs, forget it. They
Yeah.
never stopped.
Yeah, I remember in Germany there was one time a guy picked us up, and by himself. He had an older Mercedes. Lynn sat in the back. I sat in the front with him. And did he have a bird dog in the back with him, with you?
I don't remember that.
He'd been hunting. Well, anyway, he spoke excellent English. So I asked him where he'd learned English, and he said early in the Second World War, his Stuka was shot down over Kent, and he bailed out, survived obviously, and he was shipped to Canada, and he spent the rest of the war in Canada. And I said, well, what was that like? He said, oh, it was great. He said, people back home were starving. We had good food. Some of the guys had girlfriends. We could go into town. You could have a job. We had our own gardens. So he felt very, very fortunate to have survived the war that way. And then in Denmark, there was a man who took us to lunch and then took us home for the night. And I remember that when we walked in here, he walked in and his wife looks at, these two, he brought home these two people she didn't know were coming, and she's expected to give us a meal and find us a place to sleep. And you had the feeling at that time that people still had warm feelings because of America's involvement in the war. Actually, we heard that. I remember hearing that from a Dutchman.
Rotterdam.
Yeah.
Actually, we've kind of glazed over when we were hitchhiking, and I was in the back seat, and we had a couple different really crazy hitchhiking experiences, but all of a sudden Jan said, we're getting out of here. Why? I mean, I probably said, why? No, we're getting out of here. Well, it turned out that the driver was beginning to stroke your thigh.
Yeah.
I couldn't see that
I
from
think
the back
I
seat.
blocked that memory.
So, and then another time, some other place, it seems like this was in, where was that?
I think it was in France, I think you're thinking about, yeah.
Well, anyway, it doesn't matter exactly where it was. These two guys picked us up, and they kept stopping to get, have another drink.
Oh, that was when we passed from Germany into Belgium.
Okay, that was in
And
Belgium?
Yeah, they had that Citroën sedan.
Yeah, so it was a nice car.
Yeah.
But they kept stopping and drinking some more, and finally they decided, no, we're too drunk, we need to put you in a taxi.
Right.
And they paid the taxi driver to take us to the edge of town, because you couldn't hitchhike from downtown, you needed to get out on the highway. And that bastard went around the block and made us get out.
Yeah.
And we were right in the middle of town,
Yeah.
and walked a
Oh,
long
that's
ways.
right, that's right. And we were also, this was another time we'd run out of money. And so the next money was here we were on the Belgian-German border, and with very little money, and we knew that we had to have enough money for the ferry. So we had to set that aside. And so we're walking through, I think it's Liège, Belgium, where we were. And it was getting dark. And here I am with a duffel bag on one shoulder and carrying a suitcase in the other hand. And Lynn's coming behind with about 6 things, that she's carrying in her hands.
And a guitar.
And a guitar. And there was a woman who had a shop, and she was standing out in the doorway of the shop. And I stopped and asked her where the train station was. And she said, take such and such a bus. And I said, no, we're walking. How do you get to the train station? She went back and opened up her till and came back and gave us enough money to take the bus.
And see, what I don't remember the money, but she gave us a loaf of bread, because it was a bakery.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah,
I didn't remember
the kind of
that.
scorched loaf, but it was like, we were hungry
Yeah.
and broke.
And then we got on the train, and we were in a compartment with, was it 2 sailors? Do you remember that?
Yes, I do.
And they spoke French, so you guys, and one of the guys. So anyway, we were talking. They'd been on leave. They were on their way back to the naval base, and they just said, "You're hungry. We can recognize that you're hungry." So when we got to Ostend,
I think they gave us a candy bar and some cigarettes.
yeah,
Something like
but
that.
but when we got to Ostend, they had me go with them, and it was late at night. They had me go walk with them back to their base, and we had a satchel, or a large bag, a drawstring bag. They took the bag and they went into the base, and they came back, the thing stuffed full of food, most of which was ship's biscuit. These really hard, hardtack biscuits that were actually very nutritious, and of course they keep forever. And so that's pretty much what we ate until, and then in Ostend, we didn't have enough money so we were looking for some place to sleep. And the guy who worked in the station let us sleep all night in the bar, which was amazing. We slept on benches in the bar, but the bar, the beer taps were still working. I didn't go drink beer, but everything was just left out, and we were just
Gosh,
allowed
I
to
don't
stay
even remember
overnight
that
there.
part. But what I remember, so we needed to get train, or just
No,
boat,
just the boat,
and then the train
and
into
then-
London.
No, I think we hitchhiked into London from Dover.
Did we?
Yes, we did, because it was a guy who'd been to Switzerland on a skiing vacation, and he was on his way back to London, and he gave us a
Okay.
ride. Yeah.
Well, in any case, we didn't have enough money for the ferry.
Oh, we didn't?
No, we didn't have enough money for the ferry. And so that guy, we would sit there, and that's why I was thinking that there were 2 legs to the trip, a train and a ferry. Well, in any case, that doesn't matter that precisely. We didn't have enough money. Yeah, because we kept sitting down and thinking, well, maybe it was ferry and train into London is what we needed, because
That's right.
there'd be money at the American Express. That was it, in London. Okay, so we'd sit down and we'd think, well, maybe we should buy 2 ferry boat rides and then one train to London. I'll get into London, you hitchhike to London. It didn't seem like a very good plan. So then we'd sit down, or we didn't have enough quite for that. Whatever. We kept trying different, permutations of this, getting us to London. And finally, the man at the selling the tickets, he said,
That's
"How
right.
much do you lack?"
That's right.
And we lacked, probably less than $5.
Yeah.
And he said, "I've never done this before. I'm going to loan you the money. Do you promise you'll send it back to me?" And he gave
That's
us
right.
his address, and he loaned us some money so that we could both take the ferry and the train to get to London.
Yeah, and we did send the money
Of course
back.
we sent the money back,
Yeah.
but it wasn't very much. And we weren't, the reason that he did that probably is we weren't asking for help, but he could
Yeah.
just see us. Well, how about this?
Yeah, there was all kinds of strategy. I was going to stay there. Lynn was going to go ahead. She was going to stay there. I was going to go ahead and bring the money back and all this and that. But in the end, it worked out.
Yeah, and we had those rations from that because
Yeah.
we were hungry.
Yeah, we ate those. We ate those for days.
Yeah, so we finally made it to London.
Yeah, stayed in.
I think they let us even check into the hostel on the absolute guarantee that we would have money at American Express the
Right.
next day.
Yeah, Earl's Court. The part of London at that time they called Kangaroo Valley because that's where the Australians went.
Huh.
Anyway, nice time in London. Of course, it's we attended in Trafalgar Square an anti-Vietnam demonstration, the first one of that sort of thing that we had seen. And then we hitchhiked to. Did we hitchhike or we took a train? I can't remember, to Cambridge. We went to Cambridge.
I think we
and,
took a train. I don't recall
yeah.
hitchhiking up there.
Anyway, we went to Cambridge and took, pushed a punt along the river, saw Cambridge, and came back to London, and then we hitchhiked to Scotland. Hitchhiked to Edinburgh.
One of the people that we met in London was Tommy,
Right, from
a
Liverpool.
Liverpudlian, and we could barely understand him.
Yeah.
His name was Tommy.
Sami.
Tommy.
Yeah, he was on his way to Turkey. He was at work construction. He had a construction job out there.
He was a pretty appealing guy.
Yeah, he was, and a nice guy, but very difficult to understand. One time he was going to go someplace in the evening, and he asked me, he wanted to know if he could borrow a pair of shoes, and he kept asking me if I had a pair of pumps. And we finally worked that. He pointed at my feet, I guess, and he and I'd go out and drink beer together in the pubs, which was a new experience because I was 18, and he knew all about all these different kinds of beers and beer combinations, and beer was incredibly cheap. I can't remember what it was, but it was less than 50 cents a pint.
I really had bronchitis. I was kind of sick at that point, and so I didn't go on any of those excursions. I went to the youth hostel and went to bed. I remember somebody was a nurse and said to Jan, "Your sister's really sick."
I probably said, she'll be fine.
Well, I was.
In Edinburgh, what I remember mostly, it was cold, and there was hail, and we were just trying to find some place to stay warm most of the time.
Well, and I remember we had a picnic on benches outside the Edinburgh Castle, or sitting outside in this nasty
Yeah.
weather, having our Braunschweiger. And
Yeah, under an umbrella. So then we hitchhiked from there to Glasgow, and that's where we got we took the plane back to New York.
So I want to say it in Glasgow, the people at the youth hostel cut your hair
That's right. I got a free haircut.
because they thought, you look a little ratty to go home and meet up with your mom. Better.
Yeah, very nice people. He actually offered me a job.
And I think, we were broke again, and they gave us oatmeal, or all we were eating at that point
That's
was
right.
oatmeal. One of the things that I've, thought is pretty telling, I guess, is that on the way over, as Jan said, we took the trailways to New York, and then and the World's Fair was going on at that time.
That's right,
And
yeah.
we went to the World's Fair in New York, and then Icelandic Airways was the cheap way to fly, and kind of pretty mediocre meals. Boy, those meals were so good when we got on the way home. Changed our attitude quite a bit about the quality of the food on Icelandic Airways.
That was a 4-engine prop plane that we flew to Europe on. And I remember, sitting down in my seat in the plane and looking out at the engines and thinking, we're going to cross the Atlantic Ocean and it isn't a jet. And then I saw on the side of on the engine there was a plaque that said Rolls Royce. I said, well, it'll probably be okay.
Oh, that's good.
And I remember too, you talk about innocent abroad, when we landed in Luxembourg, it was a grass runway. And I remember when we were coming in, I looked down and I thought, oh, the grass is green in Europe just like it is in Oregon.
Yeah, we landed in Luxembourg, and we stayed in a hotel there. And it was the first time that I'd ever experienced a feather duvet.
Yeah, me too.
God, it was so luxurious.
Yeah, and it was a really small room, but very, very clean, very modern, and comfortable.
Yeah, and then we just took off hitchhiking, didn't we, the next day?
Yeah, the next day, yeah.
Pretty plucky. Backing up a little bit, so we're hitchhiking, making our way to the town where we're going to pick up our car, and we'd gotten a couple of rides, but we needed a ride for that last segment, and the man that had given us, he wasn't going quite as far as I've always been saying the wrong town where we picked up our car.
Wolfsburg.
Wolfsburg. So he stops at a gas station, and he goes and knocks on I think a couple different windows. You're going to Wolfsburg, and this woman, oh yeah. He said, you take these young people, and she's just like, oh my God. No, they're very nice. They're very nice young people. You just give them a ride to the factory in Wolfsburg. She was scared to death.
I didn't remember that.
So yeah, so many funny things happen.
Yeah, lots of funny things, and we never had a fight.
No, I like to say that too. That it's really remarkable.
And there were a lot of frustrating times.
Sure, and and I was the navigator. I was trying to find the goddamn signs on buildings. The street signs could be tucked up way up high on the side of a building, or maybe a standard street sign. Plus the fact that street names changed. Yeah. So you'd be going along, and then it was a different name.
Yeah.
So, like you said, that one time we went across that same bridge 3 times. We usually just laughed about that stuff.
Yeah. I remember one time though, Lynn was navigating, and we kept running into one-way streets that that weren't marked as such on the map. And Lynn shed a few tears on that out of frustration. We were trying to get somewhere at a particular time, and it was night. That was in Madrid. Yeah.
Well, I definitely, like I mentioned, I had unfortunately fallen in love with Ed Geis the year before we went off on this trip, and by golly, I wasn't going to not go on the trip. But I was awfully lonesome for him, and he was not that reliable of a letter writer. But one thing he did, though, in the impractical Ed Geis way, he sent us a package while we were in Madrid of a whole bunch of art history books. So, of course, then we were lugging those around. But, yeah.
Well, I'm sure we've left a lot of things out. There's a lot of wonderful, like when we were in Madrid, we were afraid of getting our car towed, and we didn't want to pay for parking. So every couple of days, I'd have to move the car, and half the time I couldn't remember where I left it. So I'd be wandering up and down these little streets all over the place looking for my car.
Yeah, I don't remember that. I do remember in Madrid, of course, we stayed there for quite a while. We went to the Prado 10 times maybe.
Yeah.
For one thing, it was something to do because it was cold and snowy, as I said. Anyway, but the older women in the Madrid post office got to know us.
There was an older, yeah, she was English woman who ran the general delivery desk. Yeah, an older woman, yeah.
So so they were they were really sweet, welcoming us. No mail today, or there was. And I remember one time she said, see those young guys over there? They're in here. They've moved to Madrid. They want to be bullfighters.
Yeah. Madrid was a very formal place. One day we went up into the mountains, the Sierra Guadaramas, and Lynn wore she had a pair of plaid slacks. And we came back into town, and we just got into town, and she said, well, let's check the mail before we go back to the pension. So I let her out of the car, and when she got back, she said that there were several people who gave her a hard time about wearing pants. That, women wore dresses in Madrid and looked gorgeous.
Yeah, the Spanish women really, they really looked all done up all the time. Their hair was beautiful and beautiful clothes, yeah.
Yeah, and no pants.
I don't remember that. I do remember having a wool coat that Mom had made for me from a Vogue pattern, and I got it scorched on a heater. I don't know, in the room at night or something, and it just really ruined it. But there was a woman, a very poor woman, sitting on the sidewalk one day, and I just gave her my wool coat. I'm sure she didn't care it was scorched.
Yeah.
Oh, we didn't talk about Copenhagen and walking 10 miles to go to that brewery.
Oh yeah, the Tuborg Brewery, yeah.
Again, we didn't have any money. We did, we had some money, but we didn't want to spend it on bus fare. So we probably walked 5 miles or something to go out to that brewery. But they gave free beer.
Yeah, they had a tasting room, and we saw the mermaid. Yeah, and I remember in Copenhagen, they had an incredible tax on tobacco, and so for some reason it was on cigarettes, I guess, but because there were a lot of very fancy-looking women in Copenhagen who smoked cigars, and we were told that it was because they were cheaper.
Oh, don't remember that.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it was a grand adventure, and as my brother said, we never got. Oh, we didn't talk about what we talked about the other day about the youth hostel in France that we showed up at night.
Yeah.
And a couple things that I remembered about that youth hostel. It was dark. I really had to go to the bathroom bad, and I remember the people who they were farmers, and they were just letting had this building that they were letting kids stay in as a youth hostel. Anyway, they lean out an upstairs window. I said, "Where's the toilet? Where's the toilet?" And they pointed to a little outhouse, and I went in there. In the dark, there's no toilet, and it was just a flat, maybe it had a ceramic surround or something, but it was a hole in the ground. That was the first time I encountered that. And then Jen was remembering that we were the only kids there that night, and so they let us sleep in the because often you'd have to have the women's dorm and the men's dorm, and they told us we could sleep in the same dorm room. And then in the morning.
Yeah, in the morning, the woman told Lynn that night, said, in the morning you bring a pan and we'll give you some fresh milk. And I went right into where where she was milking the cow, and she poured off a pint of milk or so for us. And I paid her something for it, I'm sure, but anyway, it was warm milk right out of the cow. It was delicious.
Yeah, and I remember the chickens just came walking into where the kind of kitchen of the youth hostel was, and
yeah,
it was pretty modest digs.
One thing that we didn't talk about was going to Brest.
Oh yeah.
We that was it from there to Paris? No, we went from Paris to there, and then we went down the west coast of France
Uh-huh.
because we went to Bordeaux. But anyway, our grandmother, our mother's mother, had a brother, and the brother died on a troop ship. He died of the flu on a troop ship on his way to France. and our grandmother had gave
To
us
fight
the
in the
name.
First World War.
Yeah, to fight in the First World War. And our grandmother had told her that she knew the name of the cemetery in Brest where he was buried. So we went there and we bought some flowers, and there was went through the gate into the cemetery, and there was like a lodge right there at the gate. And this little man who looked like he'd been there since the Crimean War came out, and Lynn told him what we were looking for. And he had these huge ledgers, and he started going through, and he could not find Charlie Lemons. So he said, look, here's probably what happened. You said that your uncle died at sea. He was buried at sea, and they told his relatives that he was buried in this cemetery. He said that happened a lot during that time, because they didn't want to keep all these corpses on the ship. And you're a soldier at sea, you're buried at sea. But anyway, so we just found a grave, and I don't know if we ever told Grammy what the deal was, or if we just told her. We probably did, because we didn't have a picture of his grave.
Yeah. But that we made a valiant effort.
Yeah. And on that trip, it gave us the opportunity. We visited Omaha Beach and had our picnic lunch on the beach, and saw that cemetery there, which is vast. It's the American cemetery. There's another Canadian cemetery and a British cemetery, and but anyway, when we went in, when we got to Bordeaux, we went to an opera. So Boris Godunov, and we had I can't remember what they called the cheapest seats, but it was standing. We were standing in a balcony to watch the whole thing. And there the weather was nice. It was kind of our first taste of spring.
Plus, we had zero exposure to opera, but I remember really enjoying it.
Yeah, a lot of dancing and.
I mean, I think that's one, thing to say for ourselves is that we hadn't had exposure to a lot of things, but we did.
Yeah.
On that trip.
Yeah.
Introduced ourselves to a lot of things.
Yeah.
A lot of, like I say, when we came back, our mother met us in New York, and she wanted to drive with us through the South, where she was during the war, and I was born in Columbia, South Carolina, and so there were a handful of people that were still there that she'd known as a young bride, and she'd never been back. But I remember, where do we get Braunschweiger? Where do we get yogurt? And it was all kind of weird to Mom.
Yeah. Also on that trip, we went from New York to Washington D.C. Mom had some wartime friends who lived in Bethesda, Maryland, where we stayed, and we went to the mall, and the cherry blossoms were in bloom, and there was a big anti-Vietnam demonstration at the Washington Monument, and Joan Baez sang. And then we went to Columbia, South Carolina, and saw a couple of different people that Mom knew during the war. One of the women who she rented rooms from during the war. And then we drove across the South in the end of April, and it was gorgeous. Wildflowers everywhere, and incredibly cheap. It was. We were really, the three of us have a hotel room for $7 a night. And meals were a couple of dollars, and we also met with a fair amount of suspicion because we had international license plates on the car. And I remember in one town in northern, probably Alabama or Mississippi, and the mayor came to our breakfast table and introduced himself, and was very cordial and definitely wanted to know what we were there for. Because this is the time of the Freedom Riders, and
Northerners were coming down there and
agitating.
agitating. yeah, a couple places that we had out and out hostility,
Mm-hmm.
which was a really big surprise. But
It was also the first time that we'd ever seen signs that said colored only or whites
yeah,
only.
mm-hmm.
That was pervasive. Yeah. And then we drove to New Mexico. Saw a couple who were childhood friends of my parents. He was an art teacher in Silver Springs, New Mexico. And then we drove to Tempe, Arizona, and saw our cousin Ilona and her family. And then we drove north from there. This was a 4,200-mile trip across country. And then we drove over Hoover Dam, the full length of Nevada, and to Eastern Oregon to our grandparents' house. And then we drove home.
And I have to say, all that time, I'm in the back seat, really pretty sick with bronchitis. And all I wanted to do was get home and see Ed. And I didn't care about any of these other stops along the way. It was just interminable for me to get home.
If there is one disparaging note that I might add, besides Lynn being lonely for Ed, I did all the driving. I did all of the driving. Lynn tried to drive. She'd never driven a stick shift. I'd never had either, but I was excited to do
I didn't know that was a disparaging thing. I thought you liked it.
No, wait. So as soon as we got home, as soon as we got back to Portland, she learned how to drive the damn car.
Because I had to go to Eugene and see Ed. It was funny. I had, at one point, I thought, got to do this. And I chose to take the wheel in the mountains in the Black Forest.
Yeah, that's right.
And it was hilly and steep, and I just totally freaked out.
Yeah,
and
that's right.
That was it until we got to Oregon. And
it wasn't a hardship for me to drive. I probably wanted to drive.
You wanted to.
Yeah, because I liked driving that little car.
Yeah. The other thing where there was conflict was regulating the heat.
Oh yeah.
There was a little lever between the seats. And I think I was usually cold and Jen was usually hot. So
yeah. So we surreptitiously sort of moved the lever.
Sneak your hand down there and adjust the temperature. But that's about as...
That was about as rough as the fights got, yeah.
And I think even that we laughed about.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, I don't know, we initially talked about being inspired by, wanting to go to Europe and not getting AFS and really getting support right away from our parents.
Yeah.
So, which I think they'd never been out of the country.
No, they were really enthusiastic about us doing this. Yeah. And I know that, Mom told me later, that their friends were all saying, how do the Maskells afford to do this, and all on and on. But as Lynn said, we had an insurance policy, and the insurance policy matured, and it was $1,000 a piece. And then Lynn and I worked, in the summer for 4 months, and then Mom and Dad sent us money toward the end of the time.
But a lot of the money that they were sending us, we'd left.
Well, that's right.
For them to send us in increments. But
yeah.
I think they did end up helping some. But mind you, this was also a year that we didn't go to college.
Yeah. That's
so,
right. So there was that expense.
I like to point out back at that time, a summer job could pay for 2/3 of a college year.
Yeah.
And somebody asked the other day, somebody said, what did you do with the car? Well, we gave it to Mom and Dad.
Yeah, it was Dad's work car for years. Yeah.
And I think that's kind of interesting because, yes, they helped support that trip a little bit, but
we bought the car.
We bought the car,
yeah.
and we just thought, that it was natural that we would not need a car in Eugene, and we would give the car back to our parents. I think that's kind of amazing that they took it.
Never thought it. Yeah. Well, that's the way the family was then.
Yeah. We didn't resent it, and it seemed natural to us. You didn't need a car going to U of O.
No.
And anyway, so But yeah, Daddy drove the car for a long time.
I borrowed the car back one summer.
We borrowed it to go up to Mount Hood on our honeymoon.
Okay, well,
Well, that was fun, Jan.
Yeah.
And, glad we did this, and I hope it turns out. And